Let's begin with the foundations. Let's discuss Elliot Page. This is another lecture. I'm Alexei.
And I'm Priyanka.
To frame our discussion, Elliot Page is a Canadian actor, producer, and activist whose work spans Canadian television, American independent cinema, studio blockbusters, documentary, and even performance capture in video games. We observe an early start on CBC's Pit Pony in 1997, a breakout through Hard Candy in 2005, global prominence with Juno in 2007, and consolidation in ensemble tentpoles like Inception in 2010 and The Umbrella Academy from 2019 onward. It's important to understand two terms. First, a transgender man is someone assigned female at birth who identifies as a man. Second, motion capture is a technology by which an actor's physical performance is recorded to animate a digital character. Page's lead in Beyond Two Souls is a notable example.
So, I guess we can start by thinking about the elements that make his career feel, unusually broad. Early Canadian TV, then edgy indies like Hard Candy, then Juno, then Inception and X-Men, and also Gaycation and There's Something in the Water. It makes me wonder if the range itself is part of the definition here.
Clearly, the breadth is not incidental, it is a through line. Page's career, as it were, is a study in cross-medium credibility, with recognition from film critics circles, Emmy nominations for Gaycation, a BAFTA Games nomination for Beyond Two Souls, and a Saturn Award in 2022 for the Umbrella Academy. In this context, the professional identity is dual, performer and creator, given producing, writing, hosting, and directing credits across a growing slate.
Maybe the next thing we should talk about is why it matters beyond film history. Page's transition in 2020, the Time magazine cover in 2021, and then Victor's transition on screen in 2022 is the significance basically about visibility and mainstream reach.
Yes, and not merely symbolic. Visibility in mainstream genres. Superhero ensembles and global streaming alter audience priors, to use the language of probability. It is crucial to understand that trans representation at this scale has historically been limited. Page's public transition in December 2020, the rapid updating of credits across Netflix that month, and the subsequent integration of Victor Hargreaves' transition in 2022 collectively model institutional pathways for recognition and respect. The stakes include audience perception, industry practice, and ultimately the safety and dignity of trans people whose lives are reflected or not reflected by culture. Let's proceed to the next point. Some basic coordinates. Born in Halifax, Nova Scotia in February 1987. First screen role at age 10 in Pit Pony, steady Canadian work through the early 2000s, then Hard Candy in 2005, X-Men: The Last Stand in 2006, and the breakthrough with Juno in 2007, including an Academy Award nomination. In 2010, Inception consolidated blockbuster credentials. Later, Gaycation in 2016-2017 earned 2 Primetime Emmy nominations. Page co-directed There's Something in the Water in 2019, and from 2019 to 2024 starred in The Umbrella Academy, receiving the Saturn Award in 2022. Publicly came out as a trans man in December 2020. Appeared on the cover of Time in spring 2021, launched Pageboy Productions in 2021 with an overall deal at UCP, published the best-selling memoir Pageboy in 2023. Recent and forthcoming work includes voice acting in Arc, the animated series, in 2024, development of a Beyond Two Souls television adaptation in 2025, and a reunion with Christopher Nolan for The Odyssey, targeting 2026.
And activism, we should note too. Abortion rights, support for Me Too, calling for an end to the military dictatorship in Myanmar back in 2008, gaycation as advocacy through reporting, There's Something in the Water on environmental racism in Nova Scotia, plus signing a film workers' boycott pledge in 2025. And, lighter detail, vegan for several years, named one of Peter's sexiest vegetarians in 2014. Kind of a broad spectrum of engagement.
Indeed, to some extent, the advocacy is coextensive with the creative output. One does not merely accompany the other, they intersect. Before we get to the complexities, a brief personal note. My own interest, as someone who spends a great deal of time modeling systems, is in how individual actors in public life perturb the larger social field. Page's work, particularly the quiet narrative calibration around Victor in 2022, and the institutional response of rapid credit updates in 2020, provides, if you will, a case study in how norms shift, not by decree, but by accumulation of practical steps. Let's transition to another aspect. 3 inquiries to organize our analysis.
Big question 1. What if Page had declined Hard Candy in 2005?
Context first. Hard Candy delivered the concentrated critical spotlight. Then came Juno 2 years later with an Academy Award nomination and an Independent Spirit Award win. And concurrently, the Tracy Fragments in 2007 affirmed risk tolerance for experimental work. Mathematically, we can infer that the probability of Juno-level opportunity without Hard Candy decreases, though it does not vanish. Page already had credible performances in Will Be Wonderful and on Canadian television. Yet Hard Candy's intensity, followed by critics' prizes such as the Austin Film Critics accolade, functioned as a strong signal to casting directors for roles requiring both steel and vulnerability. Without that signal, the timeline to similar visibility plausibly elongates. Perhaps Juno still arrives, or perhaps a different indie becomes the conduit a cycle later.
So, building on that, what alternative path seems most realistic? Staying longer in Canadian television? Jumping earlier to ensemble roles such as X-Men in 2006, or leaning into European indies like Mouth to Mouth?
A reasonable counterfactual is a heavier reliance on ensemble franchises and steady indie accumulation, with audition rooms informed less by a singular breakout and more by composite credibility. In simpler terms, Page likely still converges on a comparable career space, given craft, range, and existing network ties. But Hard Candy compressed the timeline and sharpened the brand. It is worth noting that the industry often allocates scarce opportunities based on conspicuous performances. Hard Candy made Page conspicuous at a pivotal moment.
Big question 2. What if the Umbrella Academy had not integrated Victor's transition in 2022?
We would arguably observe a missed inflection point. Page's public transition in late 2020 had already reset the metadata landscape. Netflix updated names across titles within a week. Integrating Victor's transition allowed the narrative to align with reality, with brevity and respect, and to model a non-sensational path. Absent that step, the series would risk a visible dissonance. An actor recognized as a trans man performing a character frozen in a prior gender presentation. This would not only squander representational capital, it could also inadvertently invite misgendering in promotional cycles and press coverage.
And audience reactions. Do you think the response would have been confusion or maybe frustration from viewers who wanted the show to reflect real life, or perhaps indifference from some segments?
Plural responses are inevitable, but the authentic choice forestalls confusion and centers agency. In this context, the show's approach, quiet, character first, allowed many viewers to update their mental model without theatrics. It is not merely optics, it is narrative ethic.
Big question 3. How can media further support transgender narratives, practically speaking?
Several levers present themselves. First, labor and authorship. Hire trans writers, directors, and editors at scale. Authorship shapes texture. Second, pipeline reliability. Green light across genres rather than clustering trans stories exclusively in trauma narratives. The Victor arc illustrates that everyday integration can be potent. Third, infrastructure. Ensure rapid, respectful metadata updates across platforms, as Netflix demonstrated in December 2020, including credits, thumbnails, and search indices. Fourth, development capital. Pageboy Productions exemplifies creator-driven packaging. Invest similarly in banners that mentor talent and protect editorial intent. Fifth, nonfiction and hybrid forms. Projects like Into My Name and Gaycation show that documentary lenses can widen empathy while maintaining rigor.
Can we maybe now look at specific examples that point in the right direction? Like, I'm thinking of There's Something in the Water, foregrounding community voices, or the Beyond Two Souls television adaptation in development, which could, embed inclusive hiring from the start.
Precisely, we can infer a composite approach. On one axis, socially engaged work such as There's Something in the Water demonstrates process integrity, letting affected communities speak. On another, genre projects, Arc the Animated Series or the Future Odyssey collaboration, normalize participation at the center of mainstream narratives. And at the level of research, we still need longitudinal studies correlating representational shifts with measurable outcomes in audience attitudes and industry hiring patterns. In conclusion on this point, the field requires both art and data. To summarize, Elliot Page is a Canadian actor, activist, and transgender man whose work ranges from Juno and Inception to Gaycation and the Umbrella Academy, with authorship expanding through Pageboy Productions and the memoir Pageboy. Our 3 questions considered the catalytic role of hard candy, the representational stakes of integrating Victor's transition, and practical routes to further support trans narratives across media.
So, I guess that kind of sums it up. For listeners who want to keep going, maybe look at other transgender actors in mainstream media and compare how projects integrate identity over time. Thank you, Alexei.
Thank you for listening. Continue learning, ask better questions, and as always, attend carefully to the evidence.